Hi. Good morning, everybody. I hope you all can hear me. I'm going to just check my mic here, which is kind of like a little bit tucked in. Hello. Good morning. It's Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin, as always. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It's nice to see you all. It's a very big day today, obviously. As always, I'm coming to you from occupied Tongva land in Southern California. My pronouns are she, her. Today I'm wearing a wide black boat neck sweater. It's a little bit chilly here this morning, actually, like weirdly. I'm not really sure why, but my hair is pulled back today. I've got on like a light pink lip. My skin is light pink. My hair is kind of blonde with a little bit of like dirty blonde roots. I'm game for that. It's pulled back today. My gold hoop earrings are in, and I am happy to see you all here today. Okay, first things first, I have to mention this because I never mention this on this broadcast. Please make sure you hit that subscribe button right below so you are subscribed to this channel. Wednesday night, we hit 4,500 subscribers on the new channel. I really want to get us to 10K before we get to kind of like any trial, because I just sort of feel like that kind of increases our circulation. It also sort of sends the message to YouTube that you all like what we're doing here. So hit the thumbs up on every video also, please, that you watch. And when you subscribe, you can also hit the bell button to turn on your notifications, and that lets you know whenever I'm going live. We got a couple of things coming up here that I'm like toying with. Many of you know I have this other YouTube channel where I was doing things that were a lot more like cinematographic, for a lack of a better descriptor. I was basically making short films about things like related to life and work and impact and friendship and all sorts of other things. And I'm debating kind of pulling some of that over here to do like, you know, the books you need to read before the 2024 election. And we may be doing some interviews here. I was awake in the middle of the night thinking about whether or not I could pull back in Malcolm Kenyatta and Joaquin Castro and Wajahat Ali and all sorts of other people who I've interviewed before. But I think it would be really helpful to get some additional pre-recorded stuff on the channel at some point that would sort of assist everyone and help you all out. So make sure you hit that notification button so you know what you're getting, and subscribe if you haven't done it already. I'm also going to remind you all that if you want to ask questions in advance of every weekly broadcast and you want to get in on our Sunday coffee hour, which is a lot more loosey-goosey and cash, you can subscribe over at patreon.com/resistancelive for as little as $2 a month. And you get a question feed that goes up 2 hours before every live stream that, you know, you can ask your questions on. I can't answer every question. I never get to every question, but I try. And sometimes I have to filter out things that have been asked before or things that like I can answer in a sentence, but I do my very best to answer most of the questions that you guys put on the feed. So yeah, head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and click subscribe to support this work. Because by the way, I have 2 kids to put through college who have just gone back to school. Okay. All right. So let's just start with the obvious. And actually, I'm going to say one thing before I start with the obvious. I know that there are a number of you on the question feed this morning who are like, let's just stop talking so much about Donald Trump. Okay, yes, I completely agree with that. As I've said many, many times, I don't think that giving him all of media attention and coverage is a good idea. However, dude had his mugshot taken yesterday. And this is a historic moment in our nation's history. And it's a turning point for American democracy, honestly. So I am going to talk about it today. And, you know, like, I'm not going to talk about him every day, but because I never do. But I am going to talk about it today because I think it's really important that we do it. And I think it's important that we do it in the context of like larger issues around where we're headed. Okay. Not just the fact that there's a mugshot. I don't really care that he lied about his weight. I honestly find the fat shaming online to be kind of like, I don't know, offensive, not appropriate. But all that said, I think it's really important that we note that we had this thing happen yesterday that has never before happened in American history, which is that a former sitting president had his mugshot taken and was processed through one of the notoriously worst jails in America. It's a really big deal. And I know he's fundraising off that shot, but I got to tell you, those of you who follow me on Threads, you know that the first thing that I pointed out last night is that if you look very closely at that picture, if you go beyond the kind of like furrowed brow and the wrinkled eyes and the attempt to give the blue steel, like I'm such a tough guy and I hate everybody involved in this kind of look, what you will notice is the quivering around his mouth, which is really apparent in that mugshot, that it's like, that he's scared. And I think it's really important that we like note that, right? That this is not he should be scared because what he's facing down is something horrible. And I think that, it's worth remembering, because I just have to point this out, how narcissists are made, all right? And one of the things that sort of disturbed me last night when people were commenting on the mugshot was, it's evil incarnate. That's what I see in that picture. What I see is someone inhuman, and I know that we're all like very, very traumatized, angry. Some of us are feeling an enormous amount of relief. Yes, I see all of you who are like, the Schadenfreude is real. Like, I'm with you on that too, okay? And also, I just want to point out that, like, narcissists are fundamentally like people who despise themselves so deeply. Like, the pit of self-loathing exists because they were never loved as children. And he's facing down his accountability right now for every awful thing that he did and for trying to overthrow American democracy. But I'm just going to point out that if you look closely at that mugshot, you see that kid. And one of the things I want everyone to remember is that the way that we don't raise narcissists, the way that we make sure that we don't raise another generation of white men, I'm saying this particularly to the white mothers with cishet boys, is that we make sure we love them to the best of our ability, and we talk to them about what it means to be in a man box, and we don't force them into behaving in particular ways where they are not allowed to show emotion, where they don't learn empathy, where they are taught that they are not good enough for anybody. It's really important that we see through how we got here. And one of the ways that we got here was that he was made. He wasn't born this way, right? And I think it's really important to recognize that it is profoundly important for us to understand, not just how we got here as a democracy, but also how we got here in terms of how this man became who he is, because it gives us a lot to learn from the standpoint of where we sit. So I'm also going to remind you all of one other thing, okay, which I think is really important in light of the way that the mugshot was being perceived, okay? One of the qualities of fascism is dehumanization. And one of the things that I am really having to talk to my kids a lot about now is how two wrongs don't make a right. We're having to have that conversation a lot in our family. Like, just this morning, one of my kids flipped the finger at the other because the other one complained about how the other one was chewing. And, we don't need to mimic them, follow their way of behaving in order to win, okay? So, this is one of the things that I think we need to recognize. He is a human being, right? And I'm not going to sit here and tell you all to have empathy for somebody who tried to destroy America, who's incredibly racist, who's fascist, who's a right-wing demagogue. I'm not going to tell you to have sympathy for him, but I am going to point out that when we use language that dehumanizes, we're sending the message that it's okay to do that, right? And to me, I think it's really critically important that we understand that we've got to be better than they are by a lot. Okay, so that's my standpoint on that. And I also just have to point out that Ramaswamy said in the debate on Wednesday night that single mothers were to blame for everything that's wrong in America, and single mothers can raise good men. So let's not forget that either. Obama was raised by a single mother. Like, let's not forget, okay? All right, so let's just talk about some of the things that are going on in Fulton County, because I want you all to kind of have a real totality perspective of what's happened in the last 48 hours, because it's a lot. Okay, Jeff Clark turned himself in overnight, like cover of darkness, didn't want anybody to know that he was there. Kanye West's publicist turned herself in this morning in Fulton County. That means we have one person left outstanding to turn themselves in out of these 19 defendants, who is presumed to be turning themselves over. I guess they probably have had to have done it already, or are doing it right now, because they've got a deadline of like noon in Atlanta. So we are in a position now where basically all of these people have been booked. I want to point out something very curious about the bail conditions here, which is that the only person who apparently is not out on bail yet is the black male defendant, who is the Blacks for Trump fellow. I hate that. I hate the name of that organization, by the way. Like, black people are not objects, but leaving all of that aside, he is the only person who is still currently being detained in the Fulton County Jail. And I just have to point out that, we need to also pay attention to what's happening here in the context of the greater racism of the criminal justice system, Fulton County Jail is a horrendous place, for those of you who don't know. I mean, people have died in the Fulton County Jail's custody like within the last few months. And I think there's something to be said here about the fact that the only defendant here who is apparently being detained at this moment in time, who doesn't have a bail agreement, is the black male defendant in this case. It's certainly something that I don't think should go unnoticed. And I have to remind you all that like the nuance of criminal justice in America is something that we cannot forget, even in this context and even in the way in which we're discussing Trump's accountability and criminal liability and everything else. All right. Okay, I have a bunch of things to talk about with regard to Fani Willis this morning. So let's talk about Chesbro's trial date. So this was an ultimate FAFO, F around, find out moment yesterday that I had to kind of like celebrate in my own way, which is that Ken Chesbro asked for a speedy trial date. His lawyers filed a motion for a speedy trial date on the assumption, presumably, that Fani Willis was not going to be ready to go to trial, like, you know, within a couple of months. And I'm just going to point out here that, you know, one of the things that happened in response to this, oh, that's interesting. Okay, I must have missed this. I guess Rachel indicated last night that the fellow who's being detained also had other charges pending against him. I'm just going to say one other thing. That doesn't mean that he shouldn't be out on bail. Like, by the way. So let's not miss the kind of like way this is all going, right? Like, Trump has other charges pending against him. He's out on bail. You know, so like, let's take the context for what it is, all right? Like, I don't want anybody using this as a reason to claim that the criminal justice system is not like inherently racist, white supremacist, sexist, classist, because it is, all right? All right. So Fani Willis called Chesbro's bluff is where I was, which is that she suggested to the judge overseeing all of these cases that they start the trial in the third week of October. And the judge said, okay, Ken Chesbro, you want a speedy trial? Let's go to trial in October. And I have to say that, you know, like, we can see how this all plays out, but, you know, it's going to be really interesting to see how this all goes. Now, the judge's order in this regard specifically said that it did not apply to any other co-defendant. So this is just Chesbro for now. Now, if Chesbro severs his case from Trump's, that's going to start a kind of like, I don't know, interesting course of events, because what we may see is other defendants, and I predicted this back when these indictments dropped, you all remember, that there would probably be some attempts to sever other defendants from the case, because, you know, not just because it's hard to try 19 defendants. I'm going to remind you all, there's no way there's going to be 19 defendants by the time all of this is said and done. Some of them are going to cut plea agreements. Some of them are going to testify. You know, we're going to have to see how this all goes, all right? But I want to point out to all of you that there is still a possibility hanging out there that other defendants could be tried in conjunction with Ken Chesbro, depending on how the motions go in relation to this in the next few days, weeks. I personally am actually really excited for an October trial, even if it's not Donald Trump himself, because I'm going to tell you why. Chesbro is still accused of being a part of the RICO conspiracy. He still has a RICO count against him. And even if Ken Chesbro is tried alone by Fani Willis starting in the middle of October, like, we're going to see the evidence of the RICO conspiracy. And of course, we're also going to see the evidence of, you know, like Ken Chesbro's direct involvement in it, but that's going to bring a lot of other things into play. So, you know, we're talking here about like a matter of like 2 months till we've got a trial against one of Donald Trump's co-conspirators in Fulton County. Like, that's great. Like, I actually think that's really, really good. And I think that it's going to like basically give us a really serious preview, regardless of what takes place with regard to the other defendants or Trump himself, about what's coming down the pike. The other thing is that an early trial like this, if it is truly only Chesbro, if it results in a conviction, you're going to see a lot of these other defendants flip, because they're going to know that, you know, the next thing that's going to happen is it's going to be them, and maybe they want a lesser sentence, and maybe they want to testify, because they want to avoid the fate of a defendant who is potentially going to be convicted. So, you know, this is all very interesting. And I'm just going to say, like, I, of course, had my own moments of like, why are things taking so long in Fulton County? Well, this is why. Because she didn't want to indict anybody until she was ready to go to trial. And I respect her for that immensely. I think it was the right call. And one of the things that continues to be made even more obvious here from the same perspective is that she thought through every possible response by every single defendant in this case before the indictments dropped. And they were ready for it, right? Like, I'm just going to say, I don't know many attorneys, period, who would be ready to go to trial 8 weeks, 10 weeks after an indictment or charges are filed. It's an extraordinarily fast timeline, even in places like where I used to practice. One of the first place I ever did a federal court oral argument was in the Eastern District of Virginia, which is known as the rocket docket on the federal bench because of how quickly cases move there. I've never heard of a case going to trial in 8 weeks on the rocket docket. So this is really quite an extraordinary turn of events. And also, like, she's ready. Like, she's not messing around. Like, Fani Willis is ready to go. Okay, so I'm going to say one other thing, by the way, because there's been so many questions in the last couple of weeks about this new, last couple of days rather, about this new bill in Georgia that is now a law that allows for what we're generally referred to as reform prosecutors to be disciplined if, you know, like a panel of appointed people by the Georgia legislature find that they've done something untoward. Now, I got to point out a couple of things about this law. Uh-oh, there's my mic. Okay, I got to point out a couple of things about this law that, like, people are not, like, talking about when they're talking about this kind of, like, on a regular basis. One of the things that I need to point out here to all of you, tell me if my sound is okay, if it's not. One of the things that I need to point out to all of you here is that this law, which was just signed by Brian Kemp not all that long ago, was not technically designed for circumstances like this, okay? And the other thing people need to be aware of is that it's really only a handful of Republican Georgia legislators that are even threatening to use it in this way. It's not the entire Georgia GOP. It's not Governor Kemp, okay? It's a few lone Georgia legislatures who are threatening to use this in a way to somehow sanction Fani Willis or have her removed, all right? The bill was originally intended to work with, like, reform, to sanction reform prosecutors, meaning prosecutors that the Republicans decided weren't law and order enough. If you don't see the irony in this, I don't know what to tell you. Because, like, basically, like, she's just doing her job, right? She's actually never been known as a reform prosecutor. She's like somebody who kind of is balls to the wall prosecutor. Sorry to use that expression again for the second time in a row. But, like, you know, she's somebody who has been perceived as being, like, extremely law and order. She's not somebody who's in there saying, like, we should be letting people off for minor drug offenses. We should be declining to prosecute cases like this that have a racially disparate impact. That's not Fani Willis, okay? So that's the first thing that's a little odd about this. But the second thing about this that's really important on this is timing. Because now that we have a trial date for Ken Chesebro in October, one of the things that you should all know about, Ron DeSantis did something different. So hold on a second. Because that's not, it's a different set of circumstances in Florida than it is in Georgia. So hold on a second, I'll get to that. The thing that I want people to be aware of here is that in order for the Georgia law to go into effect, it cannot be utilized by individual legislators or the governor, okay? It's not like Brian Kemp can just randomly decide to fire a prosecutor. All right, so that's one way in which it's very different from Georgia. All right, but let me just say one other thing here, Florida rather. One other thing I just want to say here, though, that is very significant about this is that because this law is brand new, this panel has not been appointed yet. This panel that is supposed to be engaged, and it has some, like, crazy name that's like, I don't know, I can't remember. It spells out to, like, Park or something, PAQR or something like that. They've got a name for this panel. There's nobody on the panel yet. Like, the panel itself doesn't even exist. And they're not even planning on appointing people to the panel until, wait for it, October. So the likelihood here that there's going to be any adverse action of any kind, because, by the way, the panel has to do an investigation before they can take any action. The likelihood here that there's going to be any action taken against Fani Willis in the short term, meaning like before January or February of next year, is extremely slim. And I personally am not really worried about this. I do not think that there is going to be, let's just put it this way. With Ken Chesebro having a trial set now in the middle to the end of October, like, there is not a chance now that Fani Willis is not still going to be in that position by the time that trial rolls around. And, we're going to see that evidence and we're going to see what they've got. And I will just tell you that, I don't think even this panel, even if it's appointed in October, is actually going to get to work before the end of 2023. So I think a lot of people are worried for a reason that kind of doesn't have any immediate threat. And I'm also just going to point out the political landscape on this is going to change very quickly, because the second that we've got a televised trial involving one of Donald Trump's accusers, where all the Republican witnesses are taking the stand to say what he did, what Donald Trump did, what Ken Chesebro did, I don't know, man, if the Georgia GOP is really going to want to walk that plank. So we'll have to see what happens there as well. Now, I'm going to point out, Jim Jordan has made all these threats about how he's going to start investigating Fani Willis, whatever. Every single one of Jim Jordan's investigations goes nowhere, all right? And one other thing I just want to point out here, just to circle back to this thing about this comment that Deanna made here about the 2 district attorneys in Florida. Florida allows the governor to fire district attorneys, all right? That is not the case in Georgia, so that is not what is going to happen here. And it's also really important that we understand that state laws in this regard differ all over the place, right? In other states, a governor doesn't have the ability to fire, sorry, I'm getting a notification here. I'm just going to turn this off. The governor doesn't have the ability to fire district attorneys because they're appointed positions or they're elected positions. In New York City, Alvin Bragg's elected, right? My friend Eliza Orlins ran for the district attorney's office in New York City. So he can't be fired. He can be kicked out of office the next time there's an election, but every single state handles this differently, all right? And Florida is going to Florida, all right? We all know that already, right? The things that happen in Florida are not what happened anywhere else in the country. I'm just going to say that. Honestly, they're being mirrored in many ways in Texas, but it's still not the same. So let's just all be really clear on the fact that the threat to Fani Willis is not an immediate threat. And also, I really think that I'm going to say what I said last week when this came up in a different way, which is that I do not think that a decision of any kind like that is going to be without significant political blowback to the GOP, all right? I'll just say, in another regard, many of you know that my one of the maids of honor at my wedding, one of my best friends for all time, is an attorney in Atlanta. And she and I had a conversation last night about the lay of the land in Georgia. And she is, first of all, everybody's high on Fani Willis, in Georgia generally right now. And also, there doesn't seem to really be the political will, except for a few outliers, to wade into this right now, because Brian Kemp is opposed to Donald Trump. The ex-lieutenant governor is going to be a witness on Monday in Mark Meadows' removal proceedings. And various other senior GOP officials are on the hook. One of them is in the indictment. So this is all going to be a very interesting turn of events over the next few weeks. And I'm not sure that this whole thing of we're going to try to get Fani out of office isn't just going to peter out into nothing. All right. So that's my 2 cents on that. All right. Let's just talk about removal for a second. I have to remind everybody, one of the things that I have said here all along over the last almost 7 years now is that great legal minds can differ, right? And while there are certainly some people who I rely on for their opinions, who I follow very closely, nobody is without. Actually, let me back up for a second. Let me just say this in a different way. The law is subject to interpretation, all right? The law is not written in stone. Even when, there's codified law in, the codes of criminal conduct, all right? There's still interpretation of what those codes mean. And so one of the reasons why, I'm here, apart from anything else, is because I want to help you guys understand how those codes have historically been interpreted, but I also don't want anybody to be under the illusion that everything is totally black and white, because it never actually is, all right? So when you have a former district attorney on MSNBC last night saying, there's no, people may win their removal petitions, all right? I'm going to tell you, I don't think Mark Meadows really stands much of a chance here, but we're going to see what happens in that hearing on Monday before the federal judge in the Northern District of Virginia to whom he is seeking to remove the case. We'll see what that judge says, all right? Doesn't mean he's not going to be tried under Georgia law. Doesn't mean Fonnie Willis isn't going to try the case. As we talked about twice already this week, he's really just gambling on a better jury pool. And he may lose that gamble even if removal is successful. But the other thing I just want to say here is that other defendants may try to remove to federal court, not under the basis that they were federal employees, which is the statute that Mark Meadows is trying to invoke. Even though, like trying to overthrow American democracy is not in the job description of the chief of staff of the White House, they may be successful or not. And, all of this is going to turn on individual assessments by the judge of the facts and the law related to that person themselves. So all of this is, like waiting. No, Mark Meadows' petition has not been denied. There is a hearing on Monday about that. And Brad Raffensperger and a number of other senior GOP officials have been subpoenaed to appear at that hearing. So we shall see what happens with that. Mark Meadows' petition to delay his arrest and Jeffrey Clark's petition to delay his arrest were denied. And that's why those two individuals have now been booked at Fulton County. So there was a federal denial of a delay of the arrest warrant. That's dealt with already. He's already been booked. We have his mugshot. So we're going to have to see what happens with this issue of removal. And I'm also just going to mention that with regard to the issue of severance and removal and all these other procedural mechanisms that various defendants may or may not try to take up, I want everybody to remember that, again, the facts of those motions are going to turn on the individual defendant. It's very hard to predict what the outcome of those is going to be without seeing like the basis for which they're arguing it, the facts that they're asserting, what the facts are that are being alleged against them, whether or not they are directly tied to the conspiracy in such a way that a judge thinks they can't be severed, like whether or not it's a waste of judicial resources and jury resources and courtroom resources to try 19 separate people in 19 separate trials, or whether it's easier to try them all together. There's a whole way in which this could all shift. And, I want everybody to kind of just like get really clear on the fact that, we have at this point, a serious consideration about how all of these individual things are going to go down. All right. Okay. I'm like trying to decide where to go next. Okay. Let's talk for a second about the bail bondsman. All right. So, Trump used a bail bondsman to put up his bond here in relation to the bail that was set for him. He was put in timeout. He was, I'm doing that because I just had to put a commenter in timeout. So forgive the mental glitch there. He was put into the processing system with a $200,000 bail attached. All right. And one of the things that means is you can get out on bail if you put up 10% of your bond. Ordinarily, if you happen to be somebody very rich, you put your own money into that because that is non-refundable cash if you escape on bond or you leave or you don't show up or anything like that. And using a bail bondsman is also usually an indication sometimes that you don't have the cash available to you. So that was the first thing that came into my mind. Is like, claims to be super, super rich. How come he's not walking in there with his own $200,000? All right. But the other thing I'm just going to say about this is it may be, and this is the case sometimes with certain wealthy defendants, that they just don't want to have their own money tied up in this. I am surprised, I will admit freely, that any bail bondsman was willing to take this bet. Because if for some reason he doesn't show up, the bail bondsman is not going to get paid. And, that's one of the reasons why the money is non-refundable, to be frank, but also like you're on the hook. It's sort of like a loan. So I'm just like a little bit surprised by that. And I think I was not alone in this, even though I see the reason for doing it, that you don't want your own money tied up in like the criminal justice system. At the same time, it's sort of odd. It's just sort of odd. And I know he would have had to walk in there with $200,000 in cash. It's still sort of odd. So that's just of note. Okay. Trump sold Mar-a-Lago to Don Jr. This news has like been breaking over the last couple of days. All right. One of the things that folks should just like be aware of is that one of the things that people who are under criminal indictment, where there may be fines or fees attached, or their assets could be seized tend to do is try to move those assets around. That, by the way, is not always legal. And one of the things that will become a question here in the event that there is an attempt to seize assets is whether or not this transfer was made in a manner that was designed to evade asset forfeiture. I have big questions about that also in the context of what's happening in New York State with the tax case, but we're going to leave that like separate and aside from what we're talking about right now. So it was transferred to a company that Don Jr. owns. It was valued at, I think, $435 million or something along those lines. So it wasn't transferred for a buck, unlike, the situation where Trump sold that house he owned in Florida to the Russian oligarch for like tons. More than it was valued at. We know he hasn't been that honorable about the way that he's discussed the valuation of his various properties, which is why Tish James is after him in New York State. It is noticeable. For now, it is unclear whether or not there are any adverse legal implications that would be attached to that. But I will just say that the timing for any reasonable prosecutor who was looking at the potential of asset forfeiture would be questionable at best. Okay? So we will have to see what happens with that. And we will just have to see what happens with that. And it's certainly worth a little bit of a kind of curious moment. All right. Somebody asked a question about Trump saying he did nothing wrong. Trump has these bail conditions attached to what he's allowed to say now that he's been released on bail. He is not allowed to threaten witnesses. He is not allowed to threaten a prosecutor. He's not allowed to interfere with the jury pool. He's not allowed to interfere with the witnesses. He's not allowed to do anything that potentially would be considered interference in the case or obstruction of justice or witness tampering or jury tampering, okay? Like all that is off limits. He has not said anything yet that would violate his bail. Like the TikTok is on, okay? Like we're all counting down, but he hasn't said anything yet that would violate his bail conditions. Saying that I did nothing wrong is not surprising. He is, of course, a defendant and he has a presumption of innocence until he's proven guilty. That is true, by the way, for every defendant inside the United States criminal justice system. I do want to point out to everyone, however, that, this question of does he believe it or is he just acting or is he just saying that kind of is irrelevant, right? The question that I was asked was, do you think that he knows that he's actually like done something wrong or is he just stupid or what's, I don't know that it really matters that much. I think he's going to say what he's going to say. And I'm going to point out one other thing that I can just say about narcissists generally in my own experience, and it is that they are constantly unpredictable and they will say whatever they think they need to say to evade any form of accountability. Okay. You can expect them to lie. You can expect them to do whataboutism and be like, what about Hunter? Right? Very predictable. You can expect them to say things out of left field that make all of us go squirrel, right? That's all very predictable from a narcissist. So it doesn't really matter whether he believes it or not. I hope everybody gets that. Like, he's going to do what he's going to do. And as I have said earlier this week, and this was one of the things that I said in my Substack, I think it came out on Wednesday morning about how to process the hurricane of Donald Trump that we're all living through now, that we were about to live through when I wrote it, was that we've all got to understand that he's going to do what he's going to do. And our job is to not give him that attention, except in circumstances where it really is sort of a historical moment, which is why we're talking about all of this today. I'm just going to say one other thing. Too much attention is being paid to the height and weight reporting. It's just, I know everybody is finding it funny and there are memes and whatever. I don't really care that he lied about that. Do you know what I care that he lied about? I care that he lied about something very significant that broke yesterday that nobody's talking about. And that is the fact that his own Secret Service agents were in touch with the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys on January 6th. If you, by the way, have not caught this reporting, go check out what Crew has uncovered in their FOIA requests. Because this news broke yesterday and it's getting almost no coverage, okay? What they found is that people on Trump's own Secret Service detail, this is why Trump didn't get in the car, and why rather Pence didn't get in the car going out of the Capitol building. He saw the writing on the wall. What they found is that the Secret Service detail itself was in touch with Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, as they were invading Capitol building. So, let's focus on what's real, right? It doesn't matter. There is no implication to the federal justice system that he lied about his weight. Okay? That's my 2 cents on that. Okay. I want to say one other thing about bail conditions. And again, I have to go back to what I said earlier in the broadcast here with regard to how different lawyers have different opinions about what's going to happen here. Whether or not Trump is ever remanded is going to be up to the judge, okay? It's not going to be up to any commentator on MSNBC. It's not even going to be up to any other former prosecutor who knows what they're talking about, because a lot of the new commentators on MSNBC are former prosecutors, and they're great, all right? I'm not going to knock their opinion that he's only going to get a higher bail and stricter conditions. I'm also just going to point out, though, that like there is going to be a very short leash on him from here on out, because if there is witness tampering, that is another crime. If there is jury interference, that is another crime. If there are threats to the judge or the prosecutors, that is another series of crimes. And he is not going to be allowed to just continue criming at a higher and higher bail rate. That's not going to happen here. So it's very, very, very important here that we understand that whatever we're watching, and I put myself in this boat also, because I'm not just another lawyer, but I come from a Wall Street white collar trial lawyer background, but I have opinions also that other great legal minds may differ on, and that's fine, all right? But I'm going to tell you that I do not think Fani Willis has a tolerance right now for allowing him to continue messing around like this. And I think she's going to seek the right response if he continues to interfere. So we'll see what happens, okay? But I think everybody should be prepared that, as always, just because a commentator says that it's going to be one thing doesn't mean that that's the way it's going to be. It's up to the judge, okay? All right, long haul vision. Somebody asked me to return us today to the long haul vision of where we're headed. All right, so I can do that because we haven't even spent any time today talking about the Republican debate. I'm just going to tell you all that I think everybody should be very, very afraid of Vivek Ramaswamy. His performance in the debate shows that he is following in Trump's footsteps. He wants to be the nominee. The DeSantis campaign is failing. He got enormous rounds of applause on Wednesday night. And you should all be terrified, because I am, all right? He's a very dangerous figure. And not just because he's young and not just because he's fascist, but also because he's doing everything that the Trump base wants. And if Trump is gone or out of the picture or incarcerated, the question is going to be who's going to froth that base. And I really did not like what I saw on Wednesday night from him. He basically said he was willing to burn the entire planet down for the sake of the global economy. I'm not exaggerating on that. He was burn all the coal, frack everything, destroy the environment because climate change is a hoax, and let's make more money. That's kind of where it was. You got to really keep an eye on him. I'm not joking around about this. The word, by the way, out of Silicon Valley, period, is that there have been very serious concerns about him from the standpoint of who he wants to be and who he is for quite some time. And I don't want anybody to have any illusions that he's out of the game. All right. I'm also just going to point out that all the people who were trying to be so-called rational Republicans really did not get very much praise or play on Wednesday night. All right. Nikki Haley tried to clean Vivek's clock. She did it once. She didn't make much of an impact other than that. Chris Christie was Chris Christie. There's nobody else on that stage, and DeSantis got iced out, and his performance was terrible, and he doesn't even look like a human. He looks like a robot. So, I'm not really, I think we got a lot to keep an eye on there, is what I'm going to say about that. I think that is a chess game of moving pieces with a lot of dangerous players right now. And we've really got to just understand that 2024 is coming up the pike faster than you think. We're 4 months away from the first primaries. People got to get a real perspective about what we're up against, even if Trump is in prison. All right. I also want everybody to just be kind of keeping an eye on the fact that, and this won't be the case forever. I'm not going to blame the media for not talking about Biden when Trump is being arrested in Georgia. Right. It's a historic moment. All right. I'm just going to respond to this one comment really quick. Okay. I have to remind everybody that the Prime Minister of India right now is a nationalist. Okay, he wants to see Muslims excluded and banned from India. He's a Hindu nationalist, all right? Far-right fascism exists in predominantly brown countries and even in black countries. You know, like there have been dictators and, you know, genocides in Africa that, you know, a lot of white Americans don't know anything about because we don't read anything other than United States news, which is shameful. Like you should go read the BBC and the Guardian and anything else that's covering a more international basis of what's happening elsewhere on the planet. All right. Nationalism is not exclusive to white people. Religious nationalism is not exclusive to white people. And, you know, I think that one of the things that, you know, we have to be really careful about just in general is remembering that there is no monolith of a national identity, a skin color, you know, a political identity, period, right? Like, not all brown men of color are progressive. Okay? So I'm not going to like put that comment up, but I want to make it really clear. Like, you can be a fascist and still be a first generation Indian immigrant. So let's be really careful about and do some like self-checking on this before we're out there kind of like talking about it in those terms. I think it's really important for us to recognize that one of the things, by the way, that the GOP is seeking to do here with folks like Tim Scott and with folks like Vivek Ramaswamy, if he happens to get a little bit more airplay, is they're trying to con progressive people into the idea that, and by the way, this in and of itself is racist. They're trying to con progressive people into thinking that just because someone isn't white, they're not as scary from the perspective of the damage that they could do to American democracy. All right. Everybody on that side of the fence, because of the base that they have to cater to, is in some way, even if it's just a toe dipped in it, the white nationalist realm of America right now. Okay. That includes, by the way, Nikki Haley's pitch that abortion rights should all be met in the middle. That woman still believes that, you know what? Abortion should be illegal. She may not think it should be a nationwide ban, but like she's like as hardcore anti-abortion rights as you can get. All right. She tried really hard to play it differently, but you know, like her record speaks for itself. The same, by the way, is true of Chris Christie. Okay. Like, and I have to remind everybody, the dude was implicated in a like political corruption campaign to slow down traffic on the George Washington Bridge to punish a political rival. Like, none of these people are good. All right. And, you know, it's really important that we all get very clear on the fact that there is no better option. By the way, I was also asked this morning on the feed, I just have to say it because I always have to say it, whether or not somebody in a state where they can vote Republican in a primary or in a caucus should do that. No, do not do that. Do not do that. Let them deal with themselves. We have work to do on our side of the fence, and it's like serious work. All right. So that brings me back to my other point here, which is that there is Tara, I'm going to answer that question in a minute. There is a real concern here about the lack of play that Biden's successes are getting. Now, again, I'm going to say what I said 5 minutes ago, which is that that's not surprising given that we've had this huge historical series of events over the last 2 weeks. All right. But part of the work that needs to be done, and I just got to credit Victor Shi and Santiago Meyer and all the amazing Gen Z organizers out there who are doing all this stuff right now. We've got to start talking about what Biden's done well. And we've got to start talking about it loudly. We've got to start making an impact on like the ways in which he's done historic things while he's been in office. And he certainly tried to do other historic things that the Supreme Court has shot down. Like, I don't think anybody should forget student loan forgiveness. Like, he's really trying to do certain things on that front. Not as much as I wish he would, but that's another story. I think we've really got to start talking about the fact that he's been a historic president. And I am the last person to say that I think he's been perfect, because I don't. I think there's a lot more room for growth there. But I also think that we've really got to start emphasizing the fact that, like, we're going to have him as our nominee in 2024. And it's time to start acting like we're ready to win. Okay? Instead of just like focusing on the other side of the fence. All right. I'm going to answer this last question from Tara. I'm afraid that a trial in October benefits Trump. He gets to see the evidence and strategy ahead of time to better prepare, but it could also scare him and others into deals or flipping for others. Okay. So I mentioned the issue about flipping earlier in the broadcast. I am going to say that he's already going to have this evidence. So I want everybody to understand this. Okay. There is discovery in criminal trials that is turned over to the defense. And all of the evidence that they have seen, gathered, and may use at trial is going to be provided to Trump's defense attorneys. So there's not going to be any surprises, all right? The real world doesn't work like Perry Mason, okay? The only thing that they are not going to have privy to is how the evidence is going to be presented and the questions that are going to be asked of the witnesses, all right? That's it. So there's not going to be any kind of like gotcha moment that is going to be prevented at Trump's trial, because there is no gotcha moment in litigation. Like, I think a lot of people just really don't get this. Like, Law and Order has done us all dirty by claiming that there is. There's no moment like that. You know what's coming, all right? And Trump already has all of this evidence. Much of it is already in the public domain. I just don't really see that there's any danger actually at all to Ken Chesebro having an October trial date. I think it's going to be really good for us. I think it's going to be really good for democracy. I think it's going to be really bad for Trump and his co-conspirators. So on that note, I'm going to let everybody go. This has been a really long broadcast. They seem to be a lot longer now that we're back here live every day. I'm going to remind everybody that a week from Tuesday, we start our fall reboot Life, Work, and Impact program. Registration is still open for that. And that is a 6-week program this fall that's going to be like really, really awesome about running us up to 2024 and how to get ready for 2024 and what we all need to be doing to be ready for 2024. So if you're interested in doing that, like, it is going to cover a little bit of work, a little bit of life, but a lot of impact, and how we're all going to make a difference as we head in the direction of like next year, because it's going to be a pivotal year, no question. So you can find out everything you want to know about that I'm going to put it up here really quick so you can see it. GaiaLeadershipProject.com/fall-reboot. So registration on that is going to be open until next weekend, but like time is running out. And also, if you want to upgrade to coaching with me, you can still do that. There's a limited number of slots left. I don't know, like 3 or 4. And there are payment plans available. And I would really like to see as many of you in there as possible. And I'm also just going to mention that if you want an opportunity to ask a question in advance of this broadcast, the next time it goes live, which will be on Monday, head on over to the Patreon feed and subscribe, patreon.com/resistancelive. And that also means that you'll see me on Sunday morning instead of waiting all the way till Monday in our like far more cash Sunday morning coffee hour where you can kind of ask me anything. All right. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for your subscriptions. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button on YouTube here for this channel. Don't forget to like this video. Make sure that you hit the bell notification so that you can get a notification every single time I'm live here. And I love you guys. Have a great weekend. And, it's totally fine to celebrate a little bit for now. And then, let's get back to work because we got a lot of work to do. All right. I'll see you all online. All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks for being here. Bye.